Hi guys, it's
Lauren Daisy.
welcome back to my channel, and apologies that there hasn't been a lot of videos. I think there's only been one so far in July. I have been really busy. My deadline for the book is coming up. So it's as you can imagine, incredibly time consuming. And so, yeah, it's been a real shame that I haven't been able to put as much of my kind of like time into making videos and stuff. But as soon as that deadline passes, you're gonna be sick of this face because I'm gonna make all the videos I have on my to-do list. But just bear with me until that time comes. But today, I thought it would be fun to do a little Gossip Girl video because I feel like, oh my gosh, how long has it been? 4 months. That's crazy. So it's been 4 months since I did a Gossip Girl video, and I need to come back to her. I need to come back to my roots because Gossip Girl is what literally like launched this channel for me. So we need to put some respect on her name. And today I thought once and for all, I would explain to you guys who is Chuck Bass's mother in Gossip Girl, because I feel like it is one of the most Googled questions when it comes to Gossip Girl, one of the most asked questions. I can't even tell you how many like Reddit posts there are about it, and it's kind of confusing. So I'm going to break down the entire timeline and series of events today to tell you definitively who is the biological mother of Charles Bartholomew Bass. So technically, the first time we actually hear of Chuck's mother is in the pilot, where he talks about his parents in the present tense. So it kind of makes it seem like she is alive. But for me, I just chalk this up to pilot discrepancies. I've said this a few times, you know, like Pretty Little Liars or Friends, like there are, when they're first making that first episode, they don't exactly know how the characters are going to be and all their backstories and everything like that. And in the books, Chuck's mother is alive and still with his dad. I think they're called Bart and Evelyn in the books still. So yeah, she is alive in the books. So I feel like that's why it kind of makes sense that he would just mention them in passing. In the present tense in the pilot, and then obviously once the pilot is greenlit, they can kind of work out their storylines a little bit more. So the idea of maybe like Bart and Lily being together and all that kind of stuff might have just come up after that. It's not something we see in the first episode. We actually see it in the Wild Brunch. And so I think that was just a bit of they didn't know where they wanted to go with that storyline, so then they ended up like killing her off after the pilot.
Then maybe I should swipe some of my dad's Viagra. Or my mom's Paxil?
And the next time we hear about Chuck's mother isn't actually until an entire season later. And this is in season 2, episode 5, The Serena Also Rises. And this is when Dan is trying to write a story about Chuck, kind of like sneakily. So he asks him to take him on a night out. So they do, and they end up in jail after getting into a fight. And Chuck, you know, confides in Dan that his mother died giving birth to him. And that is why Bart kind of hates Chuck, because he blames him, you know, for the love of his life, you know, his wife's death.
Yeah, me. That doesn't make sense. Does if his beloved wife died giving birth to me.
So this is when we get the real story behind Chuck's mother and that little bit of backstory. When Chuck realizes that Dan is writing a story about him and has been lying, he like changes it and he says, no, my mum died in a plane crash when I was 3 or something. I think obviously to just kind of like protect his feelings and vulnerability, so he changes the story. But obviously we know the true story is going to come out a little bit later. But for now, what Chuck believes is that his mum died giving birth to him. And actually later on, Bart says to Chuck that he never blamed him for Evelyn's death. But it's just hard for him because when he looks at Chuck, he sees her because they look so much alike and he misses her. So it's kind of hard for him to form a stronger bond with Chuck. And I think this is so interesting because of obviously what we find out about Chuck's mum, to like look back at this moment and maybe like there's this just all an emotional like ploy on Bart's part, because we know that he's like pure evil. So it's interesting, this, you kind of watch this scene in a different light when obviously you know that she ends up being alive. We also see a photo of her in Chuck's room on his nightstand. The lady in the picture isn't actually the actress that ended up playing her, but obviously the most likely thing is that they hadn't cast her yet, because she doesn't actually appear until, again, another season, in season 3. He wouldn't have a like picture of the actress because, yes, she hadn't been cast yet. Or if you wanted to kind of tie that into the plot, that maybe Bart specifically gave Chuck a fake photo of his mum, so that if Chuck, I don't know, if somehow they were ever in the same place at the same time, he wouldn't recognize her as being his mum because he has this other picture that he believes is his mum, if that makes sense.
You miss her.
You have no idea.
We don't hear or, anything about her again until season 3, episode 12. I think this one's called The Departed. And it takes place on the 1-year anniversary of Bart's death. So obviously in season 2, in the mid-season finale at the Winter Ball, Bart dies in a car crash. If you want to know the whole story of Bart's death and then his second death, I actually have a video on that explaining that whole plot line and how he was able to like stay alive and hide and kind of why he did that and everything. So you can go and watch that video. But yes, so Bart's first death was in season 2. And so season 3, we get the 1-year anniversary of his death. And when Chuck goes to visit his grave, there is a woman there, and she's leaving yellow roses on the grave. And Chuck is like, my mum's favourite flower was yellow roses, so who is this woman? And she actually sees him and recognises him and calls him Charles. And he's like, what the hell is going on? But when he tries to speak to her, she runs away. And he finds on the grave with the yellow roses a half of a locket, and it's got an E engraved on it, and there's a photo of Bart inside. So he's like, Evelyn Bass, like, is this my mother? And this is kind of like why maybe the idea that Bart had given him a fake photo to like cover up this lie kind of like makes sense, because he didn't recognize her as his mother, and like he obviously has seen like pictures of her, or there's the code to Bart's safe is her birthday, so like we know that she was still a part of their lives, kind of in memory. So like he has the picture, and I'm sure there's other pictures that maybe Chuck has seen, or if it's just that one, and that photo is fake, then it makes sense as to why he didn't recognize her when he saw her at the grave. And it was more the yellow flowers and the locket that made him think, is this my mother, potentially? So Chuck ends up taking the locket from the grave, and he takes it to his jeweler's and is like, can you find out who this was for, who, like, and everything. And they tell him that Bart had bought it for her, and that her name was Elizabeth Fisher, which obviously initially throws him off because he knows his mum's name to be Evelyn Bass, but he's like, maybe it's, some kind of like cover or something. So he goes to meet her at her hotel, but when she sees him waiting there, she quickly checks out and leaves. So he misses her again. So he's kind of doing all this little detective work, keeping it to himself, himself and his PI, Andrew Tyler. I think that's his PI. And then Blair's getting a bit like suspicious. He's like, what the hell is going on? And so he confesses to her that he thinks that this woman could potentially be his mother. And that's when we get the beyond iconic line, I think that whore may be my mother.
I think that whore may be my mother.
Gossip Girl, out of context, 10-10. 10-10. Oh my god, that just reminded me, this is so weird, it's not connected at all, but is anyone watching Love Island UK? Because if you are, Mimi and Josh, a love story for the ages. Maybe the most gorgeous couple that has ever been on Love Island, and if they don't win, I'm going to be so upset. Just adding that in there, because I think when she kissed him for the first time, or when she saw him for the first time, she was like, oh, he's 10 out of 10, like he's so my type. Anyway, that was such a tangent, but back to Chuck's poor mother. So Blair is like, right, we're gonna find this woman, like we're gonna get this done, like I'm gonna help you. And so they go and they find her, and Chuck is like, what's the tea, babes? What's the tea? And Elizabeth says that she was one of Bart's lovers, but she's not his mother, and she doesn't know who she is or like what happened to her. And so he's like a bit defeated about that, obviously, and kind of like apologizes for bothering her. And Blair is a little bit more skeptical, as she has mentioned before. I think it was about Serena. She says, oh, Serena sees what she wants to see in people and I see the truth. And I think that is Blair to a T. And she clocks this woman. She's like, I don't think you're telling the whole story. So before they leave, she goes to the like bathroom, I think it is, and confronts Elizabeth. She says that Chuck has been living his entire life believing that he like killed his mother. Obviously, that's not true. It is not his fault. If that story was true and she had died during childbirth, that is absolutely not Chuck's fault, but that's obviously how he perceives it. And so she says this is how he's lived his entire life, and if you know something that can take away even a tiny bit of the pain of thinking that, then it would be cruel of you not to share that with him, because he kind of lives in this like trauma of that. And if you're actually his mother, you should tell him. So he at the very least does not believe that that is what happened anymore. So then at the end of this episode, she calls him, but he doesn't answer it. So you think maybe he's done. He's like, you know what, not worth it. But no, obviously he's like, I think this might be my mom. And he's like, I can't let it go. So he goes on to pay an employee to get access to Elizabeth's hotel room and ends up searching it. And this is when he finds the other half of the locket that I mentioned earlier. And this half of the locket has a photo of her holding a baby. And obviously Chuck's like, this has got to be me, because one half of the locket has Bart, my dad, the other half has Elizabeth and a baby. I'm this baby. Obviously, Serena ends up setting up this whole thing to get him and Elizabeth in the same room, and you know, because he's kind of at this point not losing interest, because I think he wanted to still know the story and potentially get to know her, but I think he was just very hurt by the whole thing. He obviously knows that yes, she didn't die, but she did still abandon him and didn't want him and didn't come looking for him. He just happened to run into her. Even after, you know, she'd heard that Bart had died, she still didn't reach out to him. So he's just very hurt by her actions and everything that's happened. So he's kind of like doesn't really want to speak to her. And so Serena is kind of dealing with her own daddy issues with William. Because William doesn't really want to know her, she feels like, I don't know, this kind of weird like sense of trying to fix Chuck and Elizabeth, because she kind of can't fix what's happening with her and her own dad. So anyway, she tricks Chuck into coming to this Greek place, and Elizabeth is there. She's kind of organized for them to be there at the same time. And so Chuck's like, fine, I'll speak to her. He actually ends up trying to test her by offering her a check, assuming that the only reason she would want to get to know him now is because he's a billionaire, because he's inherited all of Bart's money. So he offers her this check, and he's hoping, obviously, that she's not going to take it, but she does. And after that, he kind of vows to never speak to her again. And it's just really sad.
As soon as I handed it to her, I didn't want her to take it.
Serena is convinced. She's like, no, like she doesn't want money. She just wants to talk to him. So she actually goes and speaks to Elizabeth herself, and she wants to hear her story because obviously she abandoned Chuck in a similar way to how William abandoned Serena. So she wants to know her reasoning. She wants to know why she did it. And Elizabeth says that she was actually only 19 when she got pregnant and she wasn't ready to be a mother yet. And so they agreed to put the baby up for adoption when he was born. But then when Chuck was born, Bart kind of instantly fell in love with him and couldn't do it, couldn't put him up for adoption and wanted to keep him. And he asked Elizabeth to marry him and for them to be a family, but she told Bart that she didn't love him and that she was going to leave. And so she was the one that actually asked Bart to tell Chuck that she had died so that Chuck would never come looking for her, and she could kind of live her life as she wanted to live it. And Bart would send her money every year to stay away, but she said she would have stayed away for free because it's just not the life that she wanted. Which again is just really sad.
19 when I got pregnant. Nowhere near ready to be a mother.
I went on like a tangent and I forgot to say this, but I was gonna say that I feel like it's just sad on all angles. I think that's the thing with this storyline, is that it's sad for Chuck, obviously, because it meant that he grew up without his, a second parent. And you can tell that that really affected him. But I think it's also sad on her part because she was only 19. Like, that's a huge decision to make at 19. And also they decided to give him up for adoption. So in her eyes, like, he was going to go to this, loving family, and she was going to be able to still live the life that she wanted to live because she just genuinely wasn't ready yet. But then last minute, after she'd already given birth to him, that was when Bart changed his mind and wanted to keep him. So it obviously would have thrown her through a complete loop as well. And that can't have been an easy decision to make, especially at 19, 20. Because she just felt like she had a lot more of life to live first, but I assume she must have still, thought about him. And I just think, on all sides of it, it's just a really rough situation, and it's just like a really sad plotline in general because she was 19, and then obviously Chuck grew up, thinking that his mum had died, and then not getting that parental love from Bart either. So it's kind of like he didn't really have either parent. And I feel like it's like a weirdly underrated storyline in terms of like the emotion of it, and like maybe like a little bit overlooked. And I think kind of like too easily villainize Elizabeth because of, you know, we're supposed to like Chuck, and obviously this has really upset him, but I think the levels of it that she would have had to go through as basically still a teenager is still really sad as well. So I don't really view her as a villain. I mean, obviously the whole thing happens with Jack that we're going to talk about, but again, that was kind of a bit of an emotional manipulation. So I think just all round, it's like, yeah, a very tricky and complex dynamic and storyline for Gossip Girl. I think it's probably one of the more complex ones that we get to see. I feel like Gossip Girl isn't as bad as Pretty Little Liars. Big ups Pretty Little Liars, love you queen. But in terms of the ages and the plot holes and like all that stuff, the timeline of Pretty Little Liars is quite tricky. I am planning on doing a video on it one day, but there's just a lot of research that has to go into that video. But yeah, like the whole Wilden, like how old is he saga, I feel like I kind of have that same thing with Bart. And so for her to be 19 when she gave birth to Chuck, right? Or at least got pregnant, then Chuck's now in season 3, what would he be? 18. Yeah, because I think it's like 16 in season 1, 17 in season 2, 18 in season 3. But then I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure it's like 18 or 19 at the most. So then it's been 19 years since she was pregnant. So let's say she was 19 when she got pregnant and then 20 when she gave birth. So that now puts her at 39. But how old was Bart when he was with Elizabeth? And like, because what are we supposed to, if he's obviously in the same age bracket as like Lily and like, but he always to me felt a little bit older. So like, how old is he supposed to be? Because like that man, there's no disrespect, there's no shade to Robert who plays him, but he doesn't look 39, right? So how old is he supposed to be? Because I always picture him to be more like 50, but then that would mean that when she was 19, he was like 29, which is gross, but also doesn't surprise me with Bart. Like, ugh. Anyway, yeah. So that's her reasoning for why she kind of did what she did. And yeah, obviously Bart kind of keeps up this lie. And I feel like sometimes in shows, again, Pretty Little Liars, catching strays in this Gossip Girl video, when things happen later down the line, sometimes I feel like the creators of shows forget what's happened in their own shows. Because in Pretty Little Lies is just such a good example of that. Because they'll do things, and then when you now know this new piece of information or this new like fold in the story or this happened or this backstory, you're like, that actually doesn't add up with what we know from like season 1 or season 2. Whereas I think this one actually does still align with what we heard about Elizabeth in the earlier seasons, because we have that photo, but obviously if she never wanted to be found, she wouldn't want Chuck to have a real photo of her, so Bart gives him a fake photo. And the idea that, I feel like that premise of Bart resenting Chuck because of what happened with Elizabeth Evelyn still lines up. Like obviously in his mind, in Chuck's mind, she died, and that's why Bart resented him, and like every time he looked at Chuck, saw her face and, you know, missed her. that still lines up, because in a way she kind of was dead to Bart as well. He never saw her again, knew that she wanted nothing to do with him or Chuck, and Chuck ultimately, because Bart decided to keep Chuck, is the reason, I mean, not the whole reason because she didn't love him, but like that Evelyn ended up leaving. So I think it still lines up pretty well for a story that they might not have, like a route they might not have known that they were going to go down in season 3. I feel like the way they wrote it in season 2, it still does line up. I think she was called Evelyn, but then I don't know, because she never married Bart, so why is she called Evelyn Bass? Maybe her name was Evelyn, or maybe it never was. Maybe her name was always Elizabeth, but like Elizabeth Fisher, and then Bart named her Evelyn Bass for like Chuck's benefit of just giving her a name that then he wouldn't be able to trace back to the real Elizabeth. Do you know what I mean? It's so convoluted. Anyway, back to present time. And Elizabeth tries to speak to Chuck again before she's just going to leave New York. And he kind of allows her to explain this whole story that obviously she had explained to Serena. And it really surprises Chuck because this entire time he thought that Bart was the heartless one, and it turns out that maybe he wasn't. So it's kind of making him question like his entire childhood. And she says that she is happy to actually stay in New York for as long as it takes in order to get to know him and to get to know her son. So he's quite happy, obviously, to now have her in his life. And again, it's just sad. Like, Chuck, I think, is a very divisive character amongst viewers. I again, every video this happens where I'm like, I'm going to make a video on this. But I am, because it wasn't always like that. And I think that opinion has come with like more rewatches and kind of holding him accountable for the things that he does in this show. And I think that is completely valid and completely fair. And he does a lot of very shitty things in this show. That being said, a lot of really shitty things also happen to him. And I feel like you could say that that's karma. But I don't think, at least for me as a viewer, the issues I have with Chuck doesn't take away from the fact that this storyline, I do find it incredibly sad. And Chuck and Elizabeth end up, bonding, and he invites her to like a gala thing, and they're, spending a lot of time together. And obviously she's meeting Blair because Blair and Chuck are together at this point, and he's happy to have his mum, who he never thought he would see, and now is having a relationship with her. And it is actually revealed that this is kind of all fake, and it was a plot that was set up by Jack Bass. So Jack, Chuck's uncle, actually had been having a relationship with Elizabeth, and she loved him. They don't really explain how this happened, because obviously she was in hiding. Maybe when Bart died, Jack was the one who reached out to her to tell her that he had died, and they reconnected, and Jack thought, I can use her as a way to get to Chuck, because his ultimate goal is to get the Empire, right? And so he then uses Elizabeth and creates this scandal around Chuck about sexual harassment of workers at the palace where Chuck obviously lived for a long time. It was another hotel that Bart owned. It's the one that we see in the pilot and in the first season when the Vanderwoodsons live there. And so this whole protest against Chuck comes out, and he decides that for Bass Industries, it'll be best for him to, and for the Empire, for him to just hand it over to somebody else that he trusts until they can kind of get this sort it out, and then he'll have the empire back. So they talked about giving it to Blair, but then it doesn't look great if his girlfriend is given the hotel. So they decide that Elizabeth would work really well because the public doesn't know her. And so he signs over the deed, I think it is, of the empire to Elizabeth, and she ends up signing it over to Jack. And he even has a DNA test done. I think he takes one of her coffee cups or something and has a DNA test done to prove that they are related before he hands the empire over to her. And yeah, it's so sad because I feel like he has such a hard time being vulnerable, being emotional, letting people in, trusting people, and kind of every time that it happens, aside from with Blair, I'd probably say, he gets let down. So yeah, it absolutely devastates him, but it does give us the iconic, did you send security to kick me out? With his weird little movement that he does. So for that, worth it.
Did you send security to kick me out?
So yeah, with Jack now kind of in power of the Empire Hotel, he has Chuck removed and begins living in the penthouse where Chuck lived. And Chuck has kind of a final meeting with Elizabeth, and she says that she regrets choosing Jack because Chuck is if you believe that Jack loves you, you are lost. There's nothing I can do for you. And she ends up realizing that it was just a plot and that Jack didn't really love her. And so she apologizes to Chuck for what she did. And she feels bad. And so she just wants to leave New York. And Chuck asks her to stay, which is so sad. And she, he's like, I can't lose my mother again. I can forgive you. We can work, you can stay. But she then says that she isn't his mother. Do you see what I'm saying? It's just there's so much to wrap your head around.
I already lost my mother once.
I'm not your mother.
So she says that she isn't his mother and that it was all just a part of Jack's plan. It was all a lie. And yeah. And I guess in turn, she's insinuating that the DNA test that was done, Jack was somehow able to forge those results, right? So Chuck obviously is devastated by this and just feels just awful. Then later, Jack actually calls Elizabeth and asks her, what are you going to do now that you've destroyed your relationship with your son? So again, she is actually his mother. And she says that she's just going to start over and just live her life how she was living it before.
You destroyed your relationship with your son.
I told Chuck I wasn't his mother. And that he deserves someone better than me.
I don't know. It's such a tricky one because I feel like in some ways she is really cruel, but in other ways I feel like she was emotionally manipulated by probably Bart and Jack. And she never wanted to be a mom from the get-go. I feel like telling him she was dead was a bit of an extreme way to go about it. But then to come back and then abandon him again, it's just double homicide, man. That is rough. So anyway, that all goes down in season 3. And then we don't hear about Chuck's mum again until season 5. So in I think it's the mid-season finale of season 5, Chuck and Blair get into a car accident and Chuck needs a blood transfusion from a family member. And initially he is told that Jack was the one who provided it. But then he figures out that this can't be true because Jack lived in the UK, I think, or he lived somewhere for a certain period of time that basically means that he is not allowed to donate blood. And he's also got hepatitis C or some shit. He can't donate blood. There's no way. So Jack then confesses that the blood was donated by Elizabeth and that she really is his mother. So Chuck's just like, for God's sake, like, like, what? Can I catch a break with this whole like storyline already? But then another curveball for Mr. Bass. He asked his PI to track down Elizabeth because he wanted to thank her for saving his life. And then when his PI does, he's like, there is no way that Elizabeth donated this blood to you. Okay, there is no way. Because she has been living in Vienna for the past 6 months, and he reached out to her and she confirmed it was not her that donated the blood. So Chuck's like, what? Well, who? Who did this? Like, I'm just trying to thank them and they're hiding from me. And in season 4, I think, is when Diana's introduced. Season 4, season 5. Diana Payne has entered the chat. So she obviously comes into it as Nate's kind of like fling. And she has a majority stake in the Spectator, which is a newspaper. We see that she is basically given the dossiers. If you remember in season 2, prior to Bart's death, Lily had found that Bart had dossiers on him. Like, he had one on himself, he had one on Lily and Serena and Eric, basically just so that he knew everything about them. And Ivy ends up stealing them from the safe to give them to Diana so that she can use whatever material from them she wants for the Spectator. And nothing really comes of that, basically. But she goes into Bart's dossier and she takes out a young photo of herself and she burns it. So it's kind of like, what is the connection here between Diana and Bart? So then later on, I think it's a couple episodes later, Dan and Blair are hosting this party and it's, whatever, it's so boring. Anyway, and during that party, Lola is trying to prove that Serena is Gossip Girl. So she starts live streaming a conversation between Diana and Serena on Gossip Girl. And in that, Diana reveals to Serena that she is actually Chuck's mother. Yes. She says to Serena, I'm Chuck's mum and I'm the one who donated the blood.
I'm Chuck's mother.
You just let out the mother of all secrets.
So Chuck's like, what the hell is going on here? Because obviously she'd been sleeping with his best friend, like, in their apartment, like, all this stuff. And he's like, you did all this while you were my mother? What? So anyway, he decides to hear her out. And she says that she had an affair while Bart was seeing Elizabeth Evelyn. And she ended up getting pregnant, Diana. And she didn't want to, raise a child. She was like, I'm too young. It's basically like the story that Elizabeth tells. Like, she basically just like yanked her story and applied it to herself. She says that actually Elizabeth couldn't get pregnant and they wanted a child. And so they decided that she would have the baby and then Elizabeth and Bart would raise him as their own. She was ashamed of herself and everything that happened, and she just wanted to move on with her life. So she ended up leaving town. And then she returned a few years later once she heard that Elizabeth Evelyn had died. And so she returned to town and had spoken to Bart, and Bart had told her the truth that Elizabeth actually hadn't died. She just did not want to raise the child, and so she had asked for them to tell everyone she was dead, and she'd left. So Diana thought, okay, now that Elizabeth's gone, maybe I should step up and be his mother. But Bart said, absolutely not. That is not a good idea. And so she went on with her life. And Bart continued to raise Chuck by himself. And it's just it's so convoluted, but it does make sense. Like, it does tie together. Like, she weaved the story in a way that it did feel at least believable to Chuck, because then he's like, okay, I guess this is how we're doing it now. So then I think the next episode or a couple episodes later, Nate is dubious. And as we know, Nate's our resident himbo, but he had a little bit of a light switch moment in this episode and he was playing detective. So he was like, I think Diana's a liar. He said, I think that Jack's back. And he is paying Diana to tell Chuck whatever he needs to further his agenda, whatever that agenda may be. And he's done it once with Elizabeth, and he's going to do it again with Diana. So Nate reaches out to Elizabeth, asking for any proof that she has that she is Chuck's mother, so that, you know, we can stop Chuck from getting scorned again. And she sends him a picture of her pregnant. And so he's like, look, this is your mother. I don't know what the hell Diana's doing, but it's Lizzie. And so obviously this whole thing was a plot, as everything is in this show, to cover up the fact that Bart was still alive. Diana actually had known Bart, and I think is the gist. They don't explain it too well, but this is how I interpret it. She actually did know him and had slept with him when she was younger. That's why her photo is in the dossier. But she was never Chuck's mum, never involved in anything like that. And so when this whole thing happened with Bart, because she is like quite powerful, like she holds a lot of weight, and she is the like leader or something, organizer, one of the co-founders, whatever it is, of the gentleman's club that Bart used to go to, that obviously Chuck ends up going to. That's where he meets Elle, I think her name was. So we know that there is a connection between Diana and Bart. That's the connection. They'd hooked up before when she was younger, and the gentleman's club, I don't know if maybe he got her into it or she, you know, the other way around. Don't know. But that's their connection. And because she kind of has these ties and this kind of power in the city, she's one of the people that helps Bart to stay dead, basically, and in hiding. The other person who knows that Bart's alive is Jack. And it's not really said at which point he found out that Bart was alive. I don't know if Diana reached out to Jack and said, look, I need your help. This is the deal, because at no point does it really seem as though Jack knows that Bart's alive in the other seasons. Like when they read the will or, you know, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't seem like he knows that Bart is alive then. Maybe he did. Maybe that's why he was so angry that Chuck got left everything in the will, because maybe they had some kind of agreement. I don't know. But also, I feel like Jack's very shady boots. And I don't think he would have kept that secret for that long without it benefiting him in some way. So my understanding of it is that he didn't know until like closer to when we find out that Bart's still alive. Diana and Jack were trying to find a way that Bart could donate his blood to save Chuck's life. So Bart is the one who donated the blood, but obviously no one's supposed to know that he's alive. So then Diana comes up with this cover story that she is Chuck's mum to explain how the blood was donated, because she's like, I'm his mum, I donated the blood. That takes away any kind of suspicion or people like digging further into it and finding out that it was actually Bart who donated the blood. So that's her whole reason, basically, for saying that she was Chuck's mum. It was a whole ruse. And it wasn't true. So, to summarize, Elizabeth Fisher is Chuck Bass's mother. They confirmed it by obviously DNA when he tested it before he handed the hotel over to her. At the time, they kind of made it seem like maybe that was forged, but clearly it wasn't, because they didn't need to forge it. Like, she is his mother. And, you know, we have the locket with the photo of herself and Chuck and Bart in it, the photo of herself pregnant, and also, you know, Jack acknowledges that she is Chuck's mother in that phone call. He acknowledges it. She proves to Nate that she is his mother. And Diana also admits that she lied about being Chuck's mother. And we know that it was just a secret to conceal the fact that Bart was alive. And yeah, Jack only called her after the accident so that she could coordinate how to get Bart's blood to Chuck. That's it. Not because they needed her blood. And yeah, I do think the story about her having an affair with Bart, like while he was seeing Elizabeth or whatever, is true. They obviously have a connection and like a history, and that's why he trusted her to keep this secret for him. But it had nothing to do with being related to Chuck. Elizabeth Fisher is Chuck's mother. She was Evelyn Bass, potentially, or that could just be a cover name, or maybe Elizabeth Fisher is the cover name so that she can just live her life. And she just didn't want to be a mum. So she asked Bart to tell Chuck that she had died. And then obviously she returns in a bid to try and help Jack, and it backfires on her and she leaves again. Obviously we find out that she's been living in Vienna. She's obviously doing whatever she's doing and is content with not being in Chuck's life. But that is it. That's the gist. That is the tea. I have investigated it. Case closed. Elizabeth is Chuck's mother. So let me know if there's any other plot lines, storylines, unanswered questions that you want like deep dive videos on. And yeah, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. You can also join to be a member below. And I will see you guys in my next video. Hopefully it won't be too long, but yeah. I'm just putting as much of my time and energy as I can into this book so that it is perfect and it is exactly what I want it to be for you guys, and that you guys will love it when it comes out. So yeah, I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.